by a mob. He got, after that, he was basically rescued by Roman authorities, and then he's kind of in a mess, in a pickle, you know. Trying to explain himself really to both parties, both the Romans and the Jews at this point, and neither side really understands it. And so at this point, the Romans have sent him back into the Jewish court system, essentially the Sanhedrin they called it, and the Romans are just kind of like, we don't know, we can't figure out, you know, you're saying that you hate this man so much that you want to kill him, but we can't figure out why you hate him so much, you know. So explain, you know, tell us what he's done, you know. We need you to tell us what makes this guy so bad that he's worthy of death. And so Paul went back to them, and he stood before them, and, you know, we started into that story last week. Things blew up right quick. It just wasn't going to work. And so Paul came up with kind of a clever way to get himself out of the situation. He made a point of saying that, you know what, the reason that we're having difficulties here is because I believe in the resurrection. And he knew that was an issue that divided the Jews among themselves, you know. And so basically they started fighting among themselves, and instead of being so focused on him, right? So basically the Romans didn't get the answers that they wanted there, and so they pull him back out of that situation, and they put him back into their protective custody, into their barracks, until they could figure out what they're going to do with him, because he had basically appealed to them as a Roman citizen. That meant that he deserved, you know, protection. He deserved a fair trial, right? And so they're just trying to figure out, okay, what we can tell everybody's mad at him, but we can't tell what he's done wrong. We can't tell what crime he's committed. So they're just trying to figure that out. And so today we're starting at chapter 23 and verse 11. And so here it says, "In the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, 'Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome.'" You know, in the opening, I think, you know, I mentioned sometimes it seems like you have trouble on every side, you know, and Paul's in that kind of situation. There's not a clear path forward here, because, you know, he's in Roman custody, and they aren't exactly godly characters here, even though they're treating him better than the Jews are at this point. But and the Jews, and we're going to see in the next verse what they're planning to do, and that's not good. So he's really in a spot where I guess you could put it, he's in a spot in his life where he isn't in control. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? You be in a spot in your life where you just don't have any control over the situation, right? It doesn't matter. You can't do anything about it, right? And so he doesn't really know if the Jews are just going to kill him. If the Romans are going to just say, you know what, forget this guy's too much trouble. Let's make the Jews happy and let them kill him. He doesn't know what's going to transpire, you know, and none of the options really seem that appealing, right? And sometimes I think we get in positions in life like that, you know. We are not in control of the situation. We don't really know what's going to happen next, and all we know is that all the options we can see in front of us don't really look all that good. And you know, it doesn't really tell us what Paul was thinking or feeling at this moment, but we do know this: the Lord came alongside of him to encourage him and to say, "Be of good cheer." So I guess if I'm reading between the lines a little bit, if you give me a little bit of liberty, I think that maybe gives us a clue about how he was feeling. Because, and I like that because it's something that God didn't have to do, you know. You know, this guy was an apostle, right? He was a smart guy, a spiritually strong guy. God could have left him there and left him guessing, but you know, God showed up. God showed up right where he was at and said, you know what, Paul, I got your back. There's a plan here. There's a way forward. I've got a job for you. You're going to make it. And you know, I've had times in my life where I know God has made a way. He stood by me, and it wasn't always with an audible voice or a presence like it was maybe here, but you know, God has found a way to make me to know that he was standing by me. Right. that he was with me, that he had a plan for me. And it might have just even been sitting in a service like this, and it was something the preacher said that just made me to know that this was God's way of speaking to me, right? Of giving me peace and comfort and encouragement in that moment. And so I'm just so thankful for a God this morning who stands alongside us. It's like the opening scripture I had for today. It says, and when you've done all to stand therefore. And we never stand alone. He's always with us. He's never left us. He's never forsaken us. And so the Lord stood with the apostle here, and he gave him encouragement, gave him hope to know that this was not the end of the line. God was going to use this confusing circumstance to open up another door of ministry, another door of opportunity for him to go and preach the gospel in Rome. And we know that from earlier in the book, there were some hints that it was already on Paul's mind to go to Rome. So God confirmed that hope in him. And so next we're going to see what the Jews had in mind for Paul, because if it were up to them, Paul would not have lived long enough to ever preach again. But when you have on the armor of God, the plans of the enemy are going to be confounded. So it goes on to say in verse 12, and when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though you would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. And so we look at this and we see the plan to murder Paul is laid out before us. It's a well thought out plan. It's not a spur of the moment type of fit of anger, but these men have bound themselves under a curse. They are not going to eat or drink until they have put Paul down. More than 40 assassins. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen recently that even one kid, basically, that's armed and is determined, is able to pull off successful murders of high-profile people who have professional security teams. And so, it would seem that Paul is in a lot of trouble here, right? He's got 40 of them. So they made a plan. They're going to have the Jewish High Council go and call the Roman authority to have them return Paul to him, that under the pretenses that they want to further question him, right? And they figure that once the guards have pulled Paul out of the barracks and are leading him down the road toward the council, that's when they're going to make their attack. That's when they're going to pounce. That's when he's going to be vulnerable, and they're going to be able to hit him right there. And the Romans couldn't do anything to stop it. They knew they wouldn't be able to protect him enough. So it was a good plan. They knew it was going to work. But you know what? God was with Paul, and God had a different plan. And God always has promised Paul that he would see Rome, and so we're going to see how it plays out. Verse 16 says, and when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring ye this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who has something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is it that thou hast to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there they lie in wait for him of more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink nor till they have killed him. And now they are ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, see thou tell no man that thou hast showed me these things unto me. And so we see something happened here that was very interesting, Number one, we didn't even know Paul had a sister, right? Wow, well, that just popped into the story out of nowhere, didn't it? Um, but he did. How about that? And sister son. See, Paul has a nephew, right? And the nephew finds out about the plot, relays the message to the Roman guards. And, it's one of those things in the Bible. There's a lot of things like this to me that I wish I knew more to the story, right? I wish it gave me more details, because really the whole situation is kind of a neat story, right? It's the kind of thing you could stretch out. You can make a movie out of something like this. So they do. Here's a guy that's, he's got these assassins after him, and they've bound themselves into this curse, and here's a kid sneaking into the jail at midnight. It's just the whole thing it's a neat story, but we don't have a whole lot of details. So I wish it was stretched out a little bit, but in the end, what we do know is this sophisticated plot is spoiled by a child. At least he was a young man, and someone that we didn't even know was a part of the story, right? But he comes in out of nowhere and saves the day. And I guess it's, to me, I guess in the end, I just look at it like this. It's kind of typical of God's work. Because a lot of times it's just unexpected, right? And how he works, it's simple. It's this big plot against him, and God uses a child,
Brother Aaron, don't ever think that you're a nobody and God won't use you, because basically this is a nobody. We don't know.
He's literally a nobody, right? Never knew he existed. But here he is. And it's a reminder, God uses the weak things to overcome the strong, So it's an amazing thing, and it comes to, and of course, the other thing that tells you it's God, it comes together at the last possible moment, right? That's how you know for sure. Oh yeah, that's God. When they're just, it's just the night before you're going to get murdered, and that's when you get rescued, right? That's how God works. But it's like we say, it's always the perfect time with God, but anyway, we see how this uncovering of the plot will work to save Paul's life as we continue. And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200, at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner: Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army, and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause whereof they accused him, I brought him forth unto their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night unto Antipyrus. And on the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him, and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. So we see that this man, Claudius Lysias, this chief captain of the Roman guard in Jerusalem, took the information that was brought to him by Paul's nephew, and he took the information very seriously. And look at the lengths that he went to keep Paul safe. 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen. We're talking 470 soldiers got up in the middle of the night in order to transport Paul safely to the Roman governor Felix. And he writes this little message explaining the situation to Felix that will accompany Paul. And so there was a lot of things that were wrong with the Roman government, and we're going to find that out in the next chapters, but they were also capable of doing some things very well at times. And this is one time where they did the right thing, and they protected someone who was a Roman citizen from unwarranted violence. And so this basically got Paul out of a place where he was being hunted by these 40 assassins, but he's not out of the woods yet, because now he has to stand before Felix and try to explain his case. And, Felix was not really a good guy. Unfortunately, people that reach these kind of exalted political positions in the world and society don't typically fall in the good guy category because, the world promotes their own. They promote the world. And to put it this way, to this day, it's very, very difficult for a truly Christian, truly godly person to experience success in the political arena because those two worlds don't mix. But nevertheless, we're going to see how Paul navigates this worldly system that he's pressed into here. Verse 34, and when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, he said, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So basically, this is just saying that Felix has accepted that he's going to hear Paul's case, but he also, has to invite Paul's accusers to come and explain why they think Paul should die. And then he has to give Paul a chance to answer for himself. So that's the setup here. And so going on to chapter 24, it says, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeth that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. We accept it always, and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. So the Jews come up to the trial, come up to the governor Felix, fully lawyered up, right? They bring this guy named Tertullus. That's a Roman name. They want somebody that not just speaks the language, but he knows how to really relate to this Roman court system, because they know that, if this just ends up being some kind of religious argument about the Jewish law, Felix is probably going to lose interest real quick. So they've hired the big name lawyer, right? The Jews had the money to spend. They spent it here on a great prosecuting attorney to make sure Paul gets condemned. So I'm just saying this is kind of more bad news for Paul, right? And we see how Tertullus is very slick with his presentation right off the bat. Now, you all kind of know enough about the Gospels and about history to know that the Jews, in reality, absolutely hated and resented the fact that the Romans had authority over them, right? You all know that's the truth, right? I mean, you can see the tension as you read even through the Gospels, right? The Jews were not happy in any way with the situation. In fact, in AD 70, which is not long after this incident, the Jews staged a rebellion, and the Romans actually came into Jerusalem and destroyed the Jewish temple. That's how the temple that Jesus went to and that Paul was at when he was drug out here, that's how that temple got destroyed. The Romans did it. Why? Because the Jews were rebelling against them. So they got tired of it, There was always ongoing tension, unrest, because the Jews they resented it, that the Romans were authority over them, They hated that. But to hear Tertullus tell the story, right? Here he is. The Jews are just overjoyed at the governorship of the Romans, of Felix in particular. He was just the best thing ever. By thee we enjoy great quietness. You do very worthy deeds for us by thy providence. We accept it always and in all places. Oh, we love to pay our taxes to you, most noble Felix.
Yeah.
He's not a noble man, by the way. We're just so glad that you have rule over us, Mr. Felix. You're just, with all thankfulness, we stand before thee. Boy, I tell you, he's landed on thick. In other words, this attorney knows that, flattery is going to be important for them to get Felix on their side. And it's not only flattery, but there's a message in it too, because why? They're going to be accusing Paul of being the person that is endangering this peaceful existence that they enjoy together between the Jews and the Romans. Paul is the man who's stirring up trouble in Felix's realm, when otherwise we're just enjoying great quietness. You know, here we are, everybody's peaceful, everybody's so happy. Then Paul shows up, and he's the antagonist, right? If we just get rid of him, everything goes back to being peaceful, right? So they're also, even as they're using flattery, they're also making a point to say that things are totally at peace until Paul shows up, right? So that he's making things look kind of bad for Paul. And we go on to hear him continue his speech, and he says, "For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him out of the way from our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto him, by examining of whom thyself may take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so." So we see Tertullus paints Paul as a pest, a source of trouble, a disturber of the peace, ringleader of rebellion, not just in Jerusalem, but all across the Roman Empire, promoter of this rebellious sect, which we notice here the Jews called the Nazarenes. That's an interesting thing to note, kind of a new thing too, because the Jews didn't call them Christians. They called them Nazarenes. Because why? Why do you think they did that? Because they were following the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, right? The heretic, according to them, the blasphemer, according to them. We even caught him, he says, defiling the temple. I mean, this is just a clear, open, and shut case. This Paul is nothing but bad news. Nobody likes him. And Your Honor, we don't really want to bother you with this man. You know, I mean, we're capable of taking care of it ourselves. Before your captain came along and took him out of our hands, we had it taken care of. You know, you don't have to do anything. We have laws that will condemn this man to death. And you won't ever have to be bothered with any of this nonsense again. Everybody's going to live happily ever after if you just turn him back over to us, and we'll take care of him. So that's their case against Paul. We'll see what Paul has to say next. In verse 10, it says, "Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself." So look at this. Paul doesn't ask for an attorney, does he? No, he said, I'll happily answer for myself to these charges. You know, he acknowledges, listen, Felix, you've been here a long time, and he had been there for a while. He had plenty of experience dealing with the Jews. He had knowledge surrounding the issues of the religion. So he's not afraid to explain his cause. And he says, "Because thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city. Neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me." So first of all, Paul says, you know what, I didn't even have time to cause trouble. I just got into town. So this was literally 12 days ago, and I've been in Roman custody for basically 11 of them, not really, but I've been in custody for most of that time. So it's kind of preposterous for them to accuse me of causing so much trouble in such a short amount of time. Yeah, I went to the temple, but I was there to worship God. I wasn't there. I didn't dispute with anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't go into the synagogues to try to teach anybody something. I did everything when I came to Jerusalem. We remember that was the deal. When he came, the first thing he did was go to the church. And the church said, Paul, we want you to be a good Jew here, right? We want you to show yourself to be approved by the law. And so he did it. He did everything that when he came to Jerusalem, he was doing everything according to the law. They even said they accused me of bringing a Gentile into the temple. Did they see that? No. Can they prove that? No. Did they have any witnesses that can testify to that? No. They made it up. They made assumptions in their own mind that aren't even true. Verse 14 says, "But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men." So we look at this, and Paul, he acknowledges that he follows a way of worship that they consider heresy, but he says the reality is what they call heresy is actually supported by all the law and the prophets. In other words, I haven't actually done or said anything that is contrary to the Jewish law. I have hope toward God of the resurrection of the dead, which is a fact that they themselves allow. And because of that belief, you have to understand, I manage my life with a clear conscience. In other words, I don't want to be on the wrong side of that resurrection. So I keep myself, he says, I keep myself clear of wrongdoing, both toward God and toward man. You know, in other words, what he's saying is, it's not my thing to go out and offend people and do things that I know are sinful, to do things that I know are against God's plan, against God's will, against God's word. I don't do that. I'm not the person that they've described here as being a troublemaker and a ringleader of terrorism, right? And so in verse 17, he says, "Now after many years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. Whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they had aught against me. Or else let these same say here, if they have found any evil doing in me while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice that I cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day." So Paul makes, I think, probably a good legal point here that the people that have brought this accusation don't even have the standing to bring the charges, because it wasn't the Jerusalem Jews that had a problem with him. It was the ones that were visiting from Asia, remember? They were the ones that stirred up the mob against him while he was basically minding his own business. He was worshiping in the temple peacefully. He says, if they have a charge against me, they should be the ones here to bring it. But they're too chicken to show up. They aren't here. The only dealing that I even had with these Jerusalem Jews are the ones is when I was brought before them in their Sanhedrin, and I said, you know what, guys, the only issue that we have between us is one concerning the resurrection of the dead. That's a religious question. It's not one that I should be in legal trouble with here, that the Roman court should be deciding. So in other words, why are we here? So you look at this and you think, you know what, despite the fancy lawyer, Paul really upended their legal case, because there isn't any proof of anything. There's no proof of wrongdoing, breaking the law. There's no witnesses. The people that brought the case don't have the standing to bring it. No laws have been brought. There's just a group of people that are basically throwing stuff against the wall against a guy who just showed up in town. And so he's been living outside of Jerusalem for years. So in other words, these guys that are trying to accuse me don't have the personal experience to come here and testify about how bad of an individual I am. And so we're going to see what Felix has to say about all of it in verse 22. It says, "And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, When Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul, and let him have liberty, that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or to come unto him." And so, Felix, he actually was very knowledgeable about the Jews, about their religion. One of his wives was actually a Jew. So he understood what was going on. He knew what the Christians were. He had some insight on the controversy surrounding Jesus. In other words, I don't think anything about this case was surprising to Felix. But he was also in a difficult position, I guess you could say, because he was a Roman governor over the Jewish nation. He had to keep order. That was his job. His job was to keep them at peace, right? So he knows very well that the Jews don't have anything on Paul legally. But it would really be easier for him if he just let them have their way. So they'd go home and shut up, right? That's all he cares about. The Romans they just didn't want the drama. You see it in the way they treated Jesus too, right? Pontius Pilate, same deal. Just, there ain't no fault in the guy, but I want to keep peace here too. I don't want these people riled up. It's my job to keep the peace, right? So give them what they want. All right. So Felix is kind of in that same kind of position, He wants to keep order. He wants to keep everybody at peace. He knows that the Jews don't have anything on Paul. And so what's he going to do? He can't really give them their way because Paul's also a Roman citizen, which means he has rights. He's worthy to be protected, to be treated fairly according to the law. So Felix what's he going to do? He's going to basically stall the situation. And so he says, all I hear is you guys telling me two different stories. So I'm just going to wait until Lysias, the chief captain who had sent Paul there, comes back, and he can maybe give me more information about what he knows. It's really a stall because guess what? Lysias never comes back. He never comes back. And we know it's just a stall because what does he do? What's he choose to do? He chooses to put Paul up in a pretty cushy circumstance for a prisoner. It's a little bit like an ancient form of an ankle bracelet. We want to keep track of you, but we also know that you're not a danger to anybody. So we're letting you have some freedom too, So he set a centurion with Paul, and Paul has to stay in the area, right? But he says, you know what? People can come and visit Paul all they want to. Yeah, he's technically a prisoner, but not really either, But he does have to stay here, So it's just kind of like Paul really just wanted to keep the peace, or Felix just wanted to keep the peace. But we're also going to make the Jews happy. No. But he did the thing that was most in any time period. They do what's convenient for them, right? Not really the right thing, just what's convenient for their best interest. So that's what Felix did. It was in his best interest to protect Paul. That was his legal obligation. So he did that. He put a centurion with him, protected him. But he also made the Jews happy because they think they've got Paul locked up, right? Paul's not going to come back and cause trouble. So he thinks he's kind of getting by the best of both worlds. But what he should have done, right? Legally, I mean, that would have been the best thing. But he says, well, I'm just going to wait until I know more of the story. But like I said, he never invited Lysias to come back. Situation for 2 years, So kind of interesting. Time for today, but thank you guys for coming out, and I hope we learned something. Look forward to continuing this